Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey, really digging into one of history's most profound and, let's face it, turbulent eras, the Reformation.
Absolutely.
And this isn't just, a recap of events. Our mission here is to really unpack how these powerful ideas, these unexpected individuals, and these massive shifts in power fundamentally reshape the Western world. We've got a fantastic stack of sources for this deep dive, including some really insightful excerpts from Will Durant's huge work, The Story of Civilization, and also a detailed history focusing just on the Reformation period itself. So get ready. We're going to explore the compelling forces that really ignited this seismic shift, meet some genuinely surprising figures at its heart, and trace the ripple effects, the ones we still feel today, actually.
Right.
History, it's just full of those aha moments, isn't it? Those unexpected connections that make you see things in a totally different light.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think this deep dive is a great chance to understand not just what happened, but critically, why it mattered so much.
Yeah.
And also how these diverse, sometimes conflicting perspectives, well, they complicated things, but maybe ultimately enriched our understanding of this pivotal time.
Yeah, complicated is probably the right word. And speaking of understanding and these big works, it's amazing how history keeps resonating, right? I was looking at some Reddit discussions about Will Durant's Story of Civilization. I mean, these volumes first came out between 1933 and 1938.
Wow, yeah.
Decades ago. And yet readers are still engaging with them, debating them. It just shows how history is genuinely a living conversation, not, just dusty facts on a shelf. There was this one comment from Jamie Todd Rubin. He said he learned about the series from Isaac Asimov's autobiography, actually.
Oh, interesting connection.
Yeah, and he was drawn in by Durant's classical style, but he particularly noted how Durant's his thesis statements often land at the end of a paragraph, not the start.
Right, that's unusual.
Yeah, and he said they frequently have the effect of a punch or punchline. Kind of depends on Durant's mood, apparently. That's quite a way to make history stick, isn't it? Having those powerful conclusions land like that.
It really is a testament to, well, good storytelling in history. And that brings up a really key point, something people often ask. What's the benefit of reading history?
Right.
It's exactly that. Understanding the past really does illuminate the present. For instance, there's this suggestion that Churchill might have used Durant's description of Louis XIV.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Durant painted him as having an insatiable appetite, cold, calculating ruthlessness, monumental conceit, but all with this veneer of culture and good manners. And the theory is Churchill sort of used that portrayal to make a point about Hitler in his own time, which, raises a really important question for us as readers. How do historical narratives get shaped by the concerns of the historian, or even our own contemporary concerns?
That's a fascinating layer. And if we're thinking about history having that punch and how narratives get shaped, it makes you think about that Aristotle quote, doesn't it?
Which one's that?
We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit.
Ah.
Applied to history, it suggests it's not just about single actions, but the habits of thought, the ingrained practices that define whole eras. It kind of underscores how deep these belief systems run, setting the stage for everything that came after. So with that idea of groundwork in mind, let's rewind a bit, not to the main eruption, but to the first sparks. Because change like this, it really happens overnight.
Exactly.
To really get the Reformation, we need to start with John Wycliffe, often called the Morning Star of the Reformation.
Wycliffe, yeah. He was, intellectually broad, doesn't quite cover it. Logic, metaphysics, Christology, politics, biblical interpretation. He was into everything. And what's remarkable is how he basically laid out the blueprint for so many core Reformation ideas, but centuries before Luther. Things like sola scriptura alone as the authority, the priesthood of all believers, the need for Bibles in the common language. His ideas were maybe a bit raw and unsophisticated compared to later reformers, but foundational. And even though they were pretty aggressively stamped out in England, they found a really fertile ground in Bohemia through his followers, the Lollards, and then later John Huss.
And the story gets really dramatic with Wycliffe's confrontation at St. Paul's in 1377. Can you picture it? Packed cathedral, Wycliffe shows up with powerful backup John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster.
Big political player.
Huge. And what happened wasn't really a trial, more like a shouting match. Gaunt and Bishop Courtney just went at it. Now, some say it was politics, just to embarrass Gaunt.
Plausible.
But others argue it was genuinely about doctrine. Wycliffe had said some pretty radical things about the Pope, like he had no special power to excommunicate, and rulers could even take church property if it was being misused.
Which really highlights how tangled up religion and politics already were.
Absolutely.
And that confrontation, well, it had consequences. His writings were declared erroneous. Papal bulls came down from Pope Gregory XI against him.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up under a sort of loose house arrest at Oxford.
Right.
But interestingly, that period seemed to push him further. It was during this time, between about 1381 and 1384, that he produced his most important work, the English Bible translation, later revised by John Purvey.
Huge undertaking.
And he also flat-out rejected transubstantiation, called it pagan or magical.
Yeah.
He wasn't holding back.
No, definitely not. He even called Pope Urban VI Antichrist in 1382, just because the Pope was encouraging a crusade against a rival pope. Wycliffe was dead set against priests being involved in war.
He really was. He died in 1384, but the church's reaction went on. Quite chilling, really. The Council of Constance in 1415 actually ordered his bones to be dug up and thrown into a stream, and they tried to destroy all his writings. It just shows what a threat they felt he was. And looking back, you can see it. All the major elements of the Reformation were in Wycliffe. He really laid that crucial groundwork.
And that torch definitely got passed. His writings, somehow, they made their way to Bohemia. Apparently, it was helped by the marriage between King Richard II of England and Anne of Bohemia.
Ah, the royal connection.
Yeah, so Bohemian students got exposed to his ideas, and that really set the stage for John Huss.
And Wycliffe's ideas caused a major split at the University of Prague. You had the Czechs largely supporting them and the Germans opposing them. Huss, well, he kept preaching despite being banned, translated Wycliffe into Czech, and even got elected rector of the university.
So he was influential.
Very. Though, interestingly, he did struggle a bit with Wycliffe's view on the Eucharist, the doctrine of remnants. He tried to kind of bridge the gap, find a way to reconcile transubstantiation with the bread and wine still being present. A subtle difference, but important to him.
But then comes his trial at the Council of Constance, July 6th, 1415. It sounds incredibly dramatic. They gave him a last chance to recant.
They did, and he refused point blank. His reported words were something like, "God is my witness. I have never taught what false witnesses testified against me. In the truth of the gospel, I now joyfully die."
Powerful stuff.
Then they stripped him of his vestments, shaved his head, put this paper crown with demons painted on him, and, well, burned him at the stake.
Just brutal.
And what was really shocking, beyond the execution itself, was the council declaring that no promises of safety made to heretics were binding. They'd given him safe conduct to come.
So they just broke their promise.
Completely. And his follower, Jerome of Prague, suffered the same fate. Looking at the bigger picture, this betrayal and execution just hammered home the threat these reformers posed to papal power. It sent a very clear, very brutal message.
And Bohemia didn't take it quietly. The Hussite movement kicked off, pushing for those 4 Articles of Prague, freedom to preach, communion in both kinds for everyone, clergy poverty, punishing serious sins. Martin V even launched crusades against them, didn't he? But they failed.
They did. And instead of crushing the movement, it led to massive destruction of monasteries between about 1419 and 1434. Really shows the depth of the anger there.
Okay, so we've seen these early sparks, individuals like Wycliffe and Huss laying the groundwork. But what else was going on? What turned Europe into this powder keg ready to explode?
Well, one huge factor, you just can't overstate it, was Gutenberg's printing press, mid-15th century.
Right, game changer.
Total game changer. It wasn't just faster. It changed how people got information. Suddenly, ideas can be copied accurately, quickly, and cheaply. Europe shifted from relying mostly on handwritten manuscripts and word of mouth to a visual world of the printed page. Luther himself thought printing was God's latest and best work for spreading the gospel. And you see it in the numbers during the Reformation. German printers were churning out like 500 titles a year.
Wow, that's an explosion of information.
Exactly. It reshaped everything.
And while that's happening externally, the church itself had some serious internal problems, right? Like the Great Papal Schism.
Oh, absolutely. From 1378 to 1417, the election of Urban VI just fractured the papacy. You ended up with multiple popes, multiple claimants to authority.
Yeah, confusing time.
Very. Europe was divided. France backed one pope in Avignon. England backed the one in Rome. Scotland went with Avignon. For the average person, it was a total scandal. It made the pope's claims look, well, implausible and really damaged papal prestige and just everyday popular piety.
And on top of that, the papacy itself wasn't exactly inspiring confidence, was it? Especially in Luther's time.
Not really. You had figures like Alexander VI, Julius II, they called him the warrior pope because he literally led armies.
A pope leading armies.
Yeah. And then Leo X, the Medici pope, described as worldly and wily, who apparently wasted a great deal of money, personal and papal, on gambling.
Doesn't sound very spiritual.
Not quite. There was even a common saying back then, the closer to Rome, the worse the Christians.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how did ordinary people deal with that level of disillusionment? How did they keep their faith when the institution seemed so flawed?
This really powerful question suggests a lot of frustration bubbling under the surface. And then there was the sheer wealth of the church.
Immense. You
Yeah.
mentioned England. Something like 1/3 of England's lands was owned by the church.
A third.
Yeah. Combine that with fees for everything, baptisms, burials, you name it, and other revenues. It just fueled this widespread resentment, this anti-clerical feeling. Durant calls it a virulent hatred for all the institutions of the church. People felt ripped off.
So you've got the printing press spreading ideas, the church's own internal chaos and corruption, this deep financial resentment.
And add to that growing nationalism.
Mhm.
Rulers were starting to push back against papal authority more assertively. We saw it earlier with Philip IV of France challenging Boniface VIII. It all just created this perfect storm, really.
Yeah.
An explosion felt almost inevitable.
Okay, so the stage is set, the powder keg is primed. Let's bring in the man who arguably lit the fuse, Martin Luther. You mentioned his personal struggle. It seems central to his story.
It really is. His time as a professor at Wittenberg, digging into Erasmus's Greek New Testament. It wasn't an overnight conversion, but a slow but clear theological progression away from the traditional teachings.
And that inner conflict sounds intense.
Profoundly so. He tried everything to earn salvation, fasting, penance, endless confession, but it just led to horror and despair. He was terrified of God's justice. His eventual break was so dramatic, publicly burning the Pope's bull of excommunication in 1520.
A point of no return.
Absolutely. A clear signal. He stood on scripture, not papal authority.
Which led straight to the Diet of Worms in 1521, standing up to the Emperor Charles V.
Right. He had safe passage, thanks to Frederick the Wise, but he stood his ground. Refused to recant unless they could prove him wrong from scripture or reason. Just an iconic moment, individual conscience versus the might of the empire and church.
Then he goes into hiding at Wartburg Castle.
Yep. And that's where he does something monumental, translating the New Testament into German. It wasn't just a translation. It basically inaugurated German literature, made the Bible accessible to ordinary Germans in their own language for the first time on that scale.
Incredible impact.
Huge. And when he came back to Wittenberg, he actually had to sort of pump the brakes on some of the more radical reformers like Karlstadt and Munzer, who were causing riots, smashing images.
Iconoclasm. Yeah.
Right. Luther had to step in, reemphasize scripture, and guide a more orderly reform of worship. He wasn't for chaos.
But then came the Peasants' War in 1524-25. That sounds like it got out of hand quickly.
It really did. Peasants took Luther's ideas about the freedom of the Christian and, well, misinterpreted them as a call for social and economic revolt.
Right.
Led to widespread violence.
And Luther's reaction changed, didn't it?
Dramatically. Initially, he was sympathetic to their grievances. But as the violence spiraled, he turned against them fiercely, famously told the nobles to smite, slay, and stab the rebels. It's a controversial part of his legacy. The outcome was horrific. Maybe 100,000 peasants killed.
A real tragedy.
And right around that time, you also get Luther's big debate with Erasmus over free will. Erasmus wrote on free will. Luther hit back with the bondage of the will.
A major theological clash.
It really marked the final split between the Christian humanists, who wanted to reform the church through education and gradual change, and the core Reformation movement, which was pushing for a radical return to Scripture alone and God's absolute sovereignty. Two different paths.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Ulrich Zwingli in Switzerland. He seems to have come to similar ideas, but independently.
Largely, yes. He was a parish priest in Glarus, studied Greek like Luther to get closer to the original scriptures, and came to many reformist conclusions on his own. He was also deeply affected by seeing the impact of the Swiss mercenary system, Swiss soldiers fighting for foreign powers, and became a strong opponent of it.
And then in Zurich.
That's where his reforms really took off. He made this bold move to preach straight through the Gospel of Matthew chapter by chapter instead of just these selected Sunday readings.
Emphasizing the sermon.
Exactly. And he insisted on interpreting Scripture through his own private study. He also successfully challenged an indulgence seller, Bernhard Samson, which really cemented Zurich as a Reformation city.
Then there's the Marburg Colloquy in 1529, an attempt to unite Luther and Zwingli.
Right. Philip of Hesse organized it. They were facing the common Catholic threat, so unity seemed crucial. And they actually agreed on a lot like 14.5 statements of faith, apparently.
So close. What was the sticking point?
The half point. It was the Lord's Supper. Luther absolutely insisted on a literal reading of "This is my body." He famously chalked it on the table.
Wow.
Zwingli argued for a figurative, symbolic understanding. And they just couldn't bridge that gap. It caused this irreparable split. Which makes you wonder, doesn't it? With such a powerful enemy, was that one theological point worth dividing over?
It seems like a high price.
And it proved fatal for Zwingli, in a way. He ended up dying in battle during the Second Civil War at Kappel in 1531, serving as a chaplain.
Killed in battle.
Yes, and his body was then burned, his ashes scattered. A really brutal end, and a stark reminder of just how violent these Reformation conflicts became.
Wow. Okay, so next up, John Calvin from Noyon in France, right? Originally set for the church.
That was the plan. Groomed for the church, but his father later steered him towards law. He was known even then for having this incredible memory and being incredibly rigorous in his studies. You can see the seeds of the systematic theologian he became.
And his conversion.
He described it as sudden, probably around 1533 or 34. It seems linked to his friend Nicholas Kopp giving this rather Protestant-leaning speech in Paris. And also a meeting with Lefebvre d'Aple, who had this idea of literal spiritual interpretation of Scripture. That combination seems to have convinced Calvin he had to break fully from the Catholic Church.
And then he ends up in Geneva, establishing the Reformation there. It sounds like he aimed for quite a transformation of the city.
He really did. Total moral reform was the goal. And it led to what some called a holy reign of terror. Strict rules about behavior, mandatory church attendance. It wasn't just about belief. It was about structuring the entire society according to God's law, as he saw it. Shows the intensity of that commitment.
And his famous doctrine, predestination, often sounds quite harsh.
It does to modern ears.
Yeah.
But Calvin apparently saw it primarily as a pastoral doctrine. The idea was to comfort believers, to assure them their salvation didn't depend on their own shaky efforts, but on God's unchanging choice.
So security for the elect.
Exactly. And the thinking was, those who were truly elect would naturally want to lead pious lives as a result of God's grace working in them.
We should probably mention the Michael Servetus case briefly, the burning in Geneva in 1553.
Yeah, it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
Servetus was condemned for heresy, particularly denying the Trinity, the really stark example of the intolerance of the age. What's striking is that both Catholics and most Protestants actually approved of the execution at the time.
Really? United on that?
Largely, yes. Though it did draw some criticism later, which Calvin felt he had to defend. It shows how deeply ingrained the idea of punishing heresy was.
Okay, let's cross the channel now. England, its Reformation story feels quite different. Led by the government, you said.
Very much so, especially at the start. The initial break wasn't really driven by theology, but by politics and, well, the king's personal life.
Right. But there was some history there already. Power struggles between kings and popes.
Oh yes, a long history, going back centuries. You had King John having to recognize the Pope as his overlord in 1213, but then later kings clawing back power, especially over appointing bishops in England. So there was already a precedent for a royal muscle flexing against Rome.
And the trigger was Henry VIII's marriage crisis.
Exactly. His marriage to Catherine of Aragon, who was his older brother Arthur's widow, had needed a papal dispensation in the first place.
Complicated from the start.
A bit. And then, years later, only one surviving child, Mary. Henry became absolutely desperate for a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty.
But the Pope wouldn't grant an annulment.
Couldn't really, politically impossible. Pope Clement VII was basically under the thumb of Emperor Charles V.
Who was Catherine's nephew.
Precisely. So, Henry's break from Rome was a calculated political strategy. He cleverly used Parliament, attacked church abuses, painted himself as the victim of papal interference, and managed to get a fair bit of popular support for it. It wasn't about Luther's ideas initially. It was about royal supremacy.
And then after Henry, things got even more turbulent.
Absolutely, a real religious roller coaster. His young son, Edward VI, oversaw significant Protestant reforms. You get Cranmer's Book of Common Prayer, especially the quite radical 1552 version, and the 42 Articles, which were strongly Protestant.
But then Mary Tudor takes the throne.
In a complete reversal. She was Catherine's daughter, staunchly Catholic, and determined to bring England back to Rome by force. This led to hundreds of Protestants being burned at the stake, earning her the name Bloody Mary.
A brutal period.
Definitely.
Until Elizabeth I comes along.
Right. Elizabeth stabilizes things. He reestablished Protestantism, but learned from Mary's mistakes. No desire for martyrs. She aimed for outward compliance, go to the official church services, but wasn't trying to police inner beliefs quite so harshly.
The Elizabethan settlement.
Exactly. She knew her own legitimacy as queen was tied to the break with Rome initiated by her father, so she had to navigate this very carefully, finding a middle way to unify a divided country.
So while all this is happening, the Catholic Church isn't just sitting back, right? There's the Counter-Reformation.
Precisely. And it's important to see it as both a reaction to Protestantism, but also an internal movement for renewal that had already begun.
Okay. Who were some key figures there?
Well, you had people like Gaspero Contarini in Italy, a reformer within the church who genuinely believed in justification by God's grace. He even tried to find common ground with Protestants on that issue at the Colloquy of Regensburg.
Did it work?
Ultimately, no. The agreement failed, and he was kind of sidelined. But it shows there were serious efforts at reconciliation and internal reform.
And then there's Teresa of Avila in Spain.
An extraordinary figure. A Carmelite nun who reformed her own order, pushing for much greater rigor, hence the Discalced or shoeless Carmelites, returning to a more austere life.
And a mystic writer.
Yes, hugely influential mystical writings, like the Mansions. She was later named a Doctor of the Church, a powerful example of deep personal spirituality driving institutional change from within.
Were there new groups forming too?
Yes. Several new religious orders emerged, focused on renewal. Like the Theatines, known for their moral strictness and charity work. And the Barnabites interesting group, founded by a doctor, a lawyer, and a math professor, focused on active charity and scholarship.
A mix of skills there.
Definitely. Shows a broader engagement.
But the big one was the Jesuits, right? Founded by Ignatius Loyola.
Without a doubt, the most influential. They became absolutely valuable for Catholic Reformation. Highly disciplined, focused on education, establishing colleges, training priests and missionaries, and fiercely loyal to the Pope. They were a major force in revitalizing Catholicism and pushing back against Protestantism globally.
And all this culminated in the Council of Trent.
Yes, though it wasn't one single meeting, but a series held between 1545 and 1563. It was the Church's big institutional response.
What did it achieve?
It did several key things. It clearly reaffirmed core Catholic doctrines like the seven sacraments, purgatory things the Protestants rejected. It condemned corruption, like the selling of indulgences, and mandated seminaries for better priest training.
So internal reforms too.
Yes, and importantly, it upheld the Latin Vulgate Bible as the primary text and condemned private interpretation of Scripture. In essence, Trent fixed the borderline, as Durant puts it, between Catholic and Protestant belief. It confirmed the split, really, defining the two distinct paths.
Okay, one final area we need to touch on. The role of women during the Reformation. It sounds like a complex picture.
It really is. There's a lot of debate among historians about whether the Reformation ultimately improved or worsened women's conditions.
How so?
Well, before the Reformation, the convent offered a significant path for women's spiritual development and even leadership. Think of abbesses and mystics. It was an environment that had most essentially supported women's individual spiritual development, as one source puts it.
Right, like Catherine of Siena convincing the Pope to leave Avignon.
Exactly. Or Mechthild of Magdeburg, a mystic who lamented that if she were a learned priest, people would praise her revelations, but felt God chose her because she was humble, teaching through unlearned lips.
But the Reformation closed the convents in Protestant lands.
It did, and the Protestant emphasis shifted towards domestic holy vocations. The ideal became the pastor's wife, the godly mother managing the household. Still spiritually significant, but in a different sphere.
Like Katharina von Bora, Luther's wife.
A prime example. Their marriage wasn't initially romantic, but became deeply loving. For Luther, marrying her was part of his testimony that he practiced what he preached about clerical marriage being okay.
And she seems to have been quite capable.
Very. She managed the household, the finances, brewed beer, raised the children. Luther clearly relied on her hugely. He called her his Katie and said he would not exchange Katie for both Venice and France. She really embodied that new ideal of the pastor's wife as a partner.
Were there women who spoke out more publicly?
Oh, yes. Argula von Grombach, a German noblewoman, publicly defended Lutheran ideas in writing when a young university tutor was under attack.
That took courage.
Immense courage. She even used scripture, citing Isaiah 3.1, about God sending women to rule when men fail to justify her speaking out, because no man will or can speak.
Wow. And Katharina Schitzel.
Wife of a Strasbourg reformer. She publicly defended clerical marriage against the local bishop, arguing his opposition was purely about money, not spiritual concerns. Very bold.
And you mentioned Marie Dantier earlier.
Yes, the French Genevan reformer whose name was finally added to the Wall of the Reformers in Geneva in 2002. A huge symbolic recognition of her impact. And figures like Elizabeth of Brandenburg, a princess who embraced Lutheranism, show how royal women could also play a key role.
So women were active, but maybe within changing constraints.
I think that's fair. And we have to remember, someone like Luther, despite his revolutionary theology in some areas, held very traditional and patriarchal views on women's roles in the church and home.
Right. Forbidden to preach, focus on home and children.
Exactly. Even while affirming their spiritual equality before God, the expected societal roles remained quite limited. It raises that important question for us. Amidst all this spiritual upheaval, how much did women's actual societal roles change, and how much stayed stubbornly the same? And what were the long-term effects of that?
That's a really crucial question to leave us with. Well, we have certainly journeyed through a lot today.
We have.
This deep dive, I think, really shows how these massive historical shifts aren't just about abstract ideas or grand movements. They happen through, the intensely personal struggles, the calculated political moves, and the often surprising, sometimes defiant actions of so many individuals.
Absolutely. And perhaps a final thought for you to take away. Consider how those conflicts and compromises from 500 years ago, the religious ones, the political ones, the personal ones, how they continue to echo today, how they still shape our ideas about freedom, about authority, about individual conscience in the world you live in right now. The Reformation isn't just history. Its ripples are still felt.